Good evening, everybody. Here we are, the last Tuesday live that I'll be doing in January 2022. And whilst I don't like the months and the time slipping by, I think most of us may be thinking, feeling quite pleased that we're getting towards the end of January, and we can certainly see the nights are getting lighter, and it just makes us feel so much better. So tonight I bring you a topic that you may well be interested in. You certainly might be interested in thinking about fat that you may be carrying around your body that you don't like the look of. It may not you feel great. You may be thinking of it from just a weight and an appearance point of view. But what I want to talk about tonight is this abdominal visceral fat that has far more far-reaching health consequences than just about your appearance. It is having a lot of health implications that I'm going to explain to you today if you're carrying quite a lot of abdominal fat over and above what would be considered a reasonably healthy weight. I'm not talking about being skinny. I'm saying those that when you see people walking around with quite distended stomachs and abdomens, what the fat is doing that's stored deep within. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about the differences between what we call this sort of subcutaneous lighter fat and this heavier, denser, visceral abdominal fat. So I'm sure you're aware over the past 30 years that the weight of the nation and the size of the nation is definitely getting bigger. And most of this weight is being carried around the abdomen. And I'll go on to talk about why this is the case. Why is it that we are now carrying this weight around the abdomen? It's far more than what you might call middle-age spread. I know most of my listeners here are heading in that direction, or you may already be there. I certainly am. You know, middle-age spread, we expect, and it's completely understandable and acceptable to be having a little bit of extra weight around the middle. But what isn't good is when there is large amounts of weight that you're carrying in that area. And for many years, we've been told to think about BMI as something to be, you know, the one thing that is a key indicator, almost from a health point of view. You know, the NHS will talk about using BMI and measuring your weight and your height and using the BMI calculator. But I would challenge you to say it's not about constantly getting on the scales, it's about measuring your waist. And your waist measurement is going to be a much greater predictor for your health overall than your overall BMI. It's not so much about your overall weight, because if you're carrying your weight more in your hips, if you're one of these pear-shaped women that you may not like, it's a much healthier place to be. It's the abdominal fat, and which is going to increase your waist and your waistband and the inches you're carrying around the weight, and that's not healthy. So if that is going up and up and up for you, be aware, listen to the rest of my talk, and you'll listen to the things that you can do to take some action. So, you know, when you poke around the middle, hopefully what you can feel there, even though you may not like it that much, is that the fat might be a little bit loose. You can move it easily, you know, and what's there on the surface, this subcutaneous fat, is just sort of this looser fat, and is completely different to the more visceral abdominal fat that starts to collect deeper within and starts to collect around our organs like our lungs and our heart. And you can't sort of poke it easily. And yeah, I've got a bit of a wobble there. I'd rather not have as I'm sitting down. But, you know, if we're carrying a lot of weight, then, you know, when you can't poke it. And, you know, there are times when I've been out and about, and it used to be, I hate to say it, but it was just America, but we see it over here more and more. You see it with people, and you see it sometimes with men, don't you? With this really distended belly, and it just looks absolutely solid. If you poked it, it wouldn't go anywhere. This isn't around a bit of gut bloating. This is far more dense abdominal fat that's the most unhealthy kind that we can carry. Now, the reason why this is such a risk is what we know today is that abdominal fat around the organs, the deeper type of fat, is biologically active. And one of the things it's known as today is it's spoken of in terms of it being what we call an endocrine organ. That means it is delivering hormones, pumping out hormones. Endocrine is to do with our hormonal system. So it's considered to be biologically active. It's considered to be an endocrine organ. So what on earth is going on? Because fat cells should just be fat cells. It should be just a deposit for fat. It shouldn't be doing anything else in the body. But unfortunately, with the research has now shown that this visceral abdominal fat is actually triggering messengers and compounds that are having far-reaching consequences as these are sent out around the bloodstream around the body. So first of all, it can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. It can increase hormonal imbalances in the body, inflammatory conditions, breast cancer, and cardiovascular disease. One of the things it does is send out these chemical messengers that are known as cytokines. Now, you may have heard in the last 2 years with COVID and early on with the dangers with COVID, and you might have heard of the term a cytokine storm. That might have been something you might have come across. Certainly, I'm aware of that. Cytokines are inflammatory messengers. Don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about a cytokine storm that triggers somebody to go into ICU from the consequences of a detrimental effect of COVID. What I'm talking about is low levels of inflammation that's been triggered by these fat cells all the time. It's sending out these like cytokine little messengers, and it's saying the body to be inflamed. It's putting the body into a pro-inflammatory state, in a low-level state. So there's lots of inflammation, and many diseases in the body are triggered through inflammation, and that inflammation can come from various reasons, and one of these is coming from this abdominal visceral fat. So we have to be very careful with these cytokines because it's not visible, we can't see what's going on, but it's sort of this drip feeder sending out cytokine inflammatory messengers. The fat also produces a hormone that can constrict our blood vessels, and it's this part of the reason why it can be one of the reasons why if you're fatter, leading to higher blood pressure, because you've got this constriction that might be going on in your blood vessels. It's also linked to higher levels of what we consider to be the more damaging, what we know as the bad type cholesterol, LDL. Cholesterol, and lowering levels of what we consider to be the good higher density HDL cholesterol. You know, cholesterol overall is not necessarily damaging to the body, but what we want is a balance and the right ratios between HDL, the better cholesterol, with the LDL. And this type of fat is going to be raising LDL more than it's going to be, and going to be lowering the LDL. So the ratio is going to be the wrong way round, which is not what we want to achieve at all. And also in men, from a hormonal point of view, what has been found is this fat can be sending out female estrogen around the body. You know, you may be aware as men are putting on more and more weight, it can appear that, you know, you hear about this term called man boobs. But, you know, we've got to be very careful here because we don't want excess estrogen being circulating around the male body, because it's really not healthy and is detrimental. Again, ratios and balance with testosterone in men, which is what's needed in greater amounts. So just what is driving this abdominal fat storage? First of all, we've got to think about the trigger of insulin, which drives fat storage. So let me explain that a bit more. We need insulin. Insulin takes glucose to our cells to be used for energy purposes. But if there's too much glucose circulating in our bloodstream, the body will use the glucose for energy production. It will take excess glucose, convert it to glycogen in our muscle cells and liver for future use as energy, as glucose, puts it back into the bloodstream as glucose. But if there's way too much glucose constantly circulating around the bloodstream, then insulin is going to take it to the liver, where it's converted into a type of fat called triglyceride. And it's this triglyceride fat that is going to be stored in these abdominal fat cells, which we don't want. So the problem with the modern diets is excess glucose that we have in excess that's coming from a number of causes, which I'm going to explain and talk about ways to reduce this. Number one, I think way up high on this list that people don't ever talk about much of is snacking. People are snacking far too much, and snacking not only is often driving and very frequently driving high levels of glucose in the bloodstream, but it's constantly raising our insulin, and this can drive further fat storage. So snacking, constant snacking, we do far too much of this in our Western diets today. Food's everywhere, isn't it? Wherever you go, it's food is at the counters to buy, and the bad sort of foods as well. Starchy carbohydrates. We have far too much of those in our diet. We tend to have an overload of fruit because people are eating fruit because they consider it to be the healthy option. But be aware of fruit and how that can be driving raised levels of sugars. And of course, too many sugary types of foods, which really should be just an occasional treat, but they're creeping into the diet on far more than just an occasional basis. They're there frequently every day, several times throughout the day. So take action now. What can you be driving? Have a look at what you're consuming and look at what action that you can take now. So number one, I would say if you're really concerned about this, number one, avoid all refined starchy carbohydrates. These are all your refined grains. And replace them with more complex grains. For example, you could be choosing brown rice over pasta. You could be thinking about eating a little bit of seeded sourdough bread over your packaged sliced bread. Even if it says it's brown bread, it's pretty much white bread that's been coloured with a bit of caramel to make it look brown, and isn't that great for you? Think about eating oat cakes in place of really refined white rice cakes or other white crackers that have no nutritional goodness in them at all. Think about eating porridge in place of other most packaged cereals that are on the shelves today. The problem with all of these is they're refined, they're very heavy in starches and high levels of sugar that you can replace with the complex ones and automatically reduce that sugar load going into the bloodstream. But over and above that, number two is thinking about your overall portion sizes of starchy carbohydrates. And if you can, get these down to about a fifth of your meal. And do you need them at all? You know, do you need a big jacket potato? Do you need to be eating bananas because they're very starchy? Can you emphasize bolognese sauce over the amount of pasta? Because usually the ratio is a lot of pasta and not much of that meat-based bolognese sauce, for example. Can you add more colourful non-root vegetables to your plate so that you're eating less rice, less pasta, less potatoes with your meal? And these non-root vegetables are going to be delivering a lot of fibre, and the fibre is going to slow the release of sugars into the bloodstream. Third, eat infrequently the following foods: pizza, pies, sandwiches, quiche, because a large proportion of what you're eating there is the white wheat-based grain. Again, it's going back to those starchy carbs. And often when we're eating any of those foods, you're getting predominantly a starchy meal and you're getting very, very little protein with the meal. So which goes on to my next point, is making sure a third of your meal is protein. The protein is going to fill you up for longer. If you've got more protein on your plate, you're going to need not so many of your starchy carbohydrates. If you're full between meals, you're also going to be less likely to be reaching for snacks because you're going to be full. It's going to keep your blood sugar levels more stable. So make sure a third of what you're eating is going to be protein. Snacking keeps insulin levels high and drives more fat storage, so try and limit the number of snacks. So taking steps of what I've just spoken about is going to help, but think twice. Do you need a snack, or is it just habit that you're going to get something to eat? Instead of going for a snack, could you go and distract yourself with something else by having a drink, reading something, catching up with something on the news, or maybe not the news at the moment, but just something to distract yourself? Pick up the phone, ring a friend. Do you really need the snack, or is it just a habit? be careful with your fruits. Fruit is notoriously high in sugars, and yet most people are not really aware of this and just put the fruit in the same category as vegetables without understanding about the sugar implications coming from that fruit. And in particular, really think about eliminating fruit juice and fruit smoothies and dried fruit, which are going to drive that sugar level even higher into the bloodstream. Try and eat just 2 pieces of fruit a day. When you eat your fruit, have it with a meal or have it with some protein like a piece of cheese or a few nuts, a few seeds, so that, you know, it's not going to be deliver a sugar spike into the bloodstream. And finally, from an eating and consuming point of view, think about what you're drinking. You know, think about eliminating those fizzy drinks. And I've also already mentioned the fruit juices and the smoothies. And do be aware of artificial sweeteners. Don't just go down the route of choosing low-cal drinks. You know, choose your water and your herbal and fruit teas over and above anything else. But don't just think that you can go for a Diet Coke and think that's okay, because there is a huge amount of research that I can't go into talk about here that indirectly shows that when we start consuming artificial sweeteners, it does strange things to what's going on in the body that actually could drive fat storage even higher or limit and inhibit fat breakdown in the body. So be very careful with that. And over and above what you're consuming, think about how much are you moving throughout a day. I'm a massive believer in movement over and above just a 60-minute exercise. We need to be moving more. I've spoken about this before in a live. You'll find a talk from me about movement in my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health. Please go and check it out and subscribe to that. Loads of videos. I've got over 100 videos now in my YouTube channel. So movement is far more important. We need to move more often. Moving is going to be driving glucose utilization and getting it out of the bloodstream more. But also, it's going to encourage the uptake of glucose, and it doesn't just need to be an intensive workout. In fact, that could be detrimental. Some brisk walking, doing some gardening when the weather's better, doing some housework, using the stairs more often in the house or when you're out and about, not using escalators and lifts, going for swimming, doing a bit of yoga. Anything that's going to expend some of those energy stores that we've got, getting some of that glucose out of the bloodstream is going to be really important, and just moving more frequently. Yes, your workouts are important, but just walking is good. And not just a 60-minute, as I said, workout. Think about doing some strength training, because certainly as we get older, we need to be very, very mindful of keeping up our muscle mass. Not talking about being bodybuilders here, but our muscles, it's really important, not only for overall posture and helping to prevent falls in later life, but we need to keep that muscle mass. And by having greater muscle mass, it's going to help to utilize our glucose and help the uptake of glucose into our cells more. Be careful of those intensive workouts. You know, intensive workouts can be a real stressor on the body, and that drives more cortisol release, and cortisol in turn can trigger fat storage. So it can be doing the opposite of what you're actually trying to achieve here. So it's about movement. Very much believe in movement and variety of your exercise as well. So with all of this, you know, it's not about a quick fix. It's taking these small, steady steps to adjust what you're doing on a daily basis, trying to slowly change your habits, changing how you're eating, changing how you're thinking about exercise and activity levels. But slowly and surely, when you start to introduce some of these things, it will slowly change your profile, your fat profile, your waist measurements, and obviously you're should feel better overall as well. So thank you for watching tonight. Really appreciate it. I'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll be in February. It'll be the 1st of February next week. Lighter still. I noticed it was light till about 5 o'clock tonight, which was great. So I hope you can join me then. As always, if there are any thoughts of talks that you'd like me to talk about, please drop me a message. drop a message below this live or in my group. You can always come in and just say, you know, what about talking about this? What do you think about that? Because I'd love to discuss it. But go and have a look at my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health, because I've got a huge number of talks that I've delivered into the group and now in the YouTube channel over the past 2 years. So go and check those out. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely week, everybody, and catch up with you next week. Bye.